So we're talking about Israel. We're talking about Ukraine, right? We're talking about sudden realization on a very, very, very short term, like kind of short notice. Hey, we need an armed civilian population yesterday. And they start handing out weapons. They start calling up reservists. They start, putting people in the army as quickly as possible, giving them uniforms and trying to hustle through their training. We saw that with Ukraine. We saw that with Israel. And you may be thinking like, oh, well, that's why you need armed security and they have guns. How much would it cost you to pay somebody? How much would you charge if someone was going to pay you to die for them?
There's no amount.
There's no amount for that. Oh, okay. The police. The police can't even handle some rioting. Police can't even handle some people smashing windows. Let's look at a city like San Jose, California. You got 1,000 police officers. Not all of them work in the streets. Call it 700 or 800 who work the streets max. Those taken away from their special assignments and taken away from desk duty. And you got maximum, 700 or 800 at a time on the street for a city of 1 million people. You got ratio of give or take 1,000 people to one police officer. How much looting and rioting can the police handle? Not to mention how much war and invasion can the police handle? How many terrorists can the police handle? So think about San Bernardino, right? We have the terrorist attack in San Bernardino. Husband and wife team started shooting people, right? How many police officers does it take to deal with a terrorist attack with just 2 bad guys? Now imagine you have 600 bad guys, 1,000 bad guys. Now imagine you have 150,000 bad guys. At what point do you realize we don't have enough police officers to deal with this? And the next question is, if you have a real problem like that's that big, that grand of a scale, even if we saw in Katrina, right, as simple as a flood in Katrina, what do we have police officers doing? Taking care of their own families first, and at gunpoint disarming this local population and taking their weapons and throwing their weapons in the floodwaters, disarming their population for their own safety, and then doing very little else, right? They're not able to do more other than try and take care of their own family and trying to do whatever they can to maintain the peace. But cops are human too. How much of a problem of civil unrest? Like sometimes the cops, look at San Francisco, the cops can barely keep up, and they don't even keep up with the amount of regular crime, like car break-ins, burglaries, home invasions, store looting, right? The cops can't even keep up with the regular amount of crime. What do you think is going to happen if there's any sort of blip or fluctuation or sudden increase in amount of civil unrest or fighting or invasion by foreign power, right? Or neighbor. Not to say that San Francisco would be invaded by foreign power. You happen to have a Pacific Ocean there, which is a very nice thing. But again, we are learning how to fight. We learn how to use weapons because as an idea, there will be a time when someone will bring a fight to you. Your choice is, are you ready for it or are you not ready for it, right? And so we're talking about the Israeli example where a security team of 12, suddenly realized that they were being attacked. They're right on the Gaza border and they start issuing out weapons to their 12-man team and they took down, a 25 platoon of the enemy, basically a platoon-sized element of the enemy, of invaders from Hamas. And for you might like, okay, well, that's for the cops and the military and the armed security. Well, as we discussed, there's no amount of money you can pay an armed security member to die for you. And there's not enough cops to go around to die for you. And plus, they're not interested in dying for you, right? They're interested in protecting their families and going home alive. And the military doesn't operate on U.S. soil. And if we're actually being honest, totally honest as Americans, the most likely enemy that we would be fighting is the U.S. military. Let's look at the times when we Americans have fought the American military. Or somebody who could have been the military, right? American Revolutionary War. Not exactly our military, but we had just fought a war of independence. We had to basically fight a second war of independence against the British Redcoats in the War of 1812, who they actually burned the White House and sacked Washington, D.C. The American Civil War, 1860. Those are Americans fighting the American military. Those are rebels, of course, the Confederacy. Now, we think of them as being other. We think of them as being just rebels and just the Confederacy because the North won, the Union won. We don't think of them as being Americans necessarily, but no, at the time, they were Americans. They were fighting for America, for their idea of America, their vision of America, against the U.S. military. Let's look at Battle of Little Bighorn and other massacres such as that. These were people who were in the United States, who were living here, who were being massacred by agents of the U.S. military. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying study history to study the future. If you study history, you will understand the future. The greatest threat is your most powerful, most well-armed neighbor. And so for Ukraine, the most powerful, most well-armed neighbor is Russia. For NATO, the most powerful, most well-armed neighbor is Russia, Soviet Union. And for Soviet Union or Russia, the most well-armed and most powerful, most dangerous neighbor is the West, Germany, England, France, whatever, United States. For the United States, the largest power now that exists and the most well-armed is China, etc., right? It doesn't take a genius to figure this out. And so for Israel, who is the largest, most well-armed, and most dangerous, most threatening neighbor who's got the most weapons? Is it Lebanon, failing state? Is it Jordan? Not super important. Syria's got their own problems with the civil war. Is it Egypt? Egypt doesn't want to fight Israel right now. Is it Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia's trying to make peace with Israel. So it's Hamas, right? And so Israel can just see the enemy.
Iran as well, yeah.
Iran is actually kind of far. They're actually nowhere near. They'd have to cross through whole countries. It's kind of difficult to cross whole desert countries by land. And what are you going to do? Fly over your whole military invasion across over whole countries? So I don't think Iran has enough paratroopers and enough air force to actually conduct an invasion by flying over whole of Iraq, right? So that's not realistic. What is realistic? Now let's talk about the United States. What is actually realistic, and why do we have weapons such as this one? We got to be totally honest and totally realistic for it. Who is the enemy?
I mean, you nailed it. It's either a rogue military or a rogue militia that you'll probably be fighting.
Well, is it Canada?
No, probably
Is it
not.
Mexico?
No.
Is it the Russians? Is it the Japanese? It's not the tuna fish out of the Pacific Ocean, right? The tuna fish are supposedly fished, kind of fished pretty low numbers now because we love our sushi, right? But so the real actual danger and the reason why we have these is for runaway government. Runaway government that no longer listens to the people. That's what we call tyranny. And so if a runaway government gets a hold of this idea that they're going to use the military to then face off against and subjugate the people, that's why we have these weapons. Like it or not, this is the purpose of the Second Amendment. And the founders of our nation thought it was so vital and so important that we had learned the lesson in blood so many times already that they wrote this down into the founding documents, essentially, of our nation, that it's so high, it's right there, right up next to freedom of religion and freedom of speech. Because without freedom of religion and freedom of speech, we can't call out a problem, we can't discuss a problem, and we can't fix a problem through the civil process. If you don't have a newspaper, how do you call attention to corruption, for example, in your politicians? If you can't call out corruption in your politicians, how do you fix those corrupt politicians? If you can't fix those corrupt politicians by voting them out of office, by petitioning, for example, well then you're going to end up with tyranny. And if you end up with tyranny, how do you fix that? Plan B. Plan B is Second Amendment. Have you heard the 3 boxes? Right? We heard of the concept of 3 boxes?
No.
As a citizen of this country, you need to understand the 3 boxes in their order of importance. Number 1, you have the soapbox. What is a soapbox? It's the idea that you have a wooden box, you put it on the ground, you stand on top of it, and you tell people in your community, hey, there's a problem with this, and we need to fix it. We need to get together, and we need to fix it. That's called the soapbox, to be able to have civil discourse with your peers, to talk to your neighbors, and about problems that we need to solve. And the second one is, how do we actually solve those problems? Through the ballot box. And the ballot box allows you to vote out those bad politicians and put in new politicians who represent the people, who represent what the people want. And the politicians that you vote into office need to be responsive to the civilian people population's needs. Otherwise, they don't belong there, because that's actually their job. You vote them in there to be responsive. And if they get in office and they got this idea of their own, they're going to be on their own little path and chase down their own career goals and do their own little thing of what they want, that's the wrong person for the job. Get rid of them. The ballot box. And if that fails, if you fail to use the soapbox and you fail to use the ballot box, then what do you have left?
Ammo box.
The cartridge box. The cartridge box is what you have left. Because the fail-safe, when a sailboat is about ready to flip over, capsize, flip over, there's something that helps to keep it upright. What is that? I don't know if you know this, but sailboats have this thing called a keel. It's like a spine. It's like a fin. It extends in the water and it's full of lead. Unless you're the Spaniards. And of course, you take your lead, you cast in the ocean, you fill it with gold. Aztec gold. But the keel is what keeps a sailboat from tipping over. So it doesn't matter how hard the wind is blowing. It blows harder, 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 and the sailboat wants to tip over. But because you have this big lead weight all the way down in the water, it keeps the sailboat upright. And it counteracts the force of the wind that can sway it one way or the other. What is the keel? What is the ballast? What is the weight that keeps the American society, the American country, the American population from flipping over upside down and capsizing when there's political turmoil, when there's rough seas and wind and difficulty in our society? What keeps us from flipping over upside down? And that is the ballast. That is the cartridge box. That is the ballot box. That is the soapbox. That is the volunteerism. And that is the people who are normal people in our society who say, that's a problem, there's something wrong, and if someone's going to do something about it, I'm going to do something about it. And again, to understand why we have weapons like this is to understand what does it mean to be a free people? What does it mean to have integrity, to do the right thing even when no one is watching? And to say, you know what, this needs to be fixed. There's a problem. Someone needs to do something about it. I'm going to do something about it. This is why the American people have weapons. Because if all else fails, we resort to the cartridge box. Thanks for joining us on this conversation.